Hi, Greg Gators. I'm Mrs. Fogarty, and we will be reading chapters 48 and 49 of Despereaux. I'll give you a second to grab your book and turn to page 246. Chapter 48, On the Tail of a Rat. Have you ever had hold of the tail of a rat? At best, it is an unpleasant sensation, scaly and cold, similar to holding onto a small, narrow snake. At worst, when you are dependent upon a rat for your survival, and when a part of you is certain that you are being led nowhere except to your death, it is a hideous sensation, indeed, to have nothing but a rat's tail to cling to. Nonetheless, Despereaux held on to Botticelli Rimorso, and the rat led him deeper and deeper into the dungeon. Despereaux's eyes had, by this point, adjusted quite well to the darkness, though it would have been better if they had not, for the things he saw made him shiver and shake. What did he see? He saw that the floor of the dungeon was littered with tufts of fur, knots of red thread, and the skeletons of mice. Everywhere there were tiny white bones glowing in the darkness. And he saw in the dungeon's tunnel, through which Botticelli led him, the bones of human beings too. Grinning skulls and delicate finger bones, rising up out of the darkness and pointing towards some truth best left unspoken. Despereaux closed his eyes, but it didn't help. He saw it as if his eyes were still open wide, the bones, the tufts of hair, the knots of thread, and the despair. Ha ha, exactly, Botticelli laughed as he negotiated the twists and turns. Oh yes, exactly. If what was in front of Despereaux was too horrible to contemplate, what followed behind him was, perhaps, even worse. Rats. A happy, hungry, vengeful parade of rats, their noses up in the air, sniffing, sniffing. Mouse, sang one of the rats joyfully. Yes, oh yes, mouse, agreed another. But something else too. Soup, called out another rat. Yes, soup, the others agreed. Blood, sang a rat. Blood, they all agreed. And then they sang, here, mousy, 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 here, little mousy. Botticelli called out to the other rats. Mine, he said. This little treasure is all mine. Gentlemen and ladies, please, I beg you, do not infringe on my discovery. Mr. Rimorso, said Despereaux. He turned and looked behind him and saw the rats, their eyes and their smiling mouths. He closed his eyes again. He kept them closed. Mr. Rimorso, he shouted. Yes, said Botticelli. Mr. Rimorso, said Despereaux, and he was crying. He couldn't help it. Please, the princess. Tears, shouted the rats. We smell tears, Mousy. We do. Please, shouted Despereaux. Little friend, said Botticelli. Little Despereaux Tilling, I promised you, and I will keep that promise. The rat stopped. Look ahead of you, he said. What do you see? Despereaux opened his eyes. Light, he said. Exactly, said Botticelli. Light. Chapter 49. What do you want, Midge Riso? Again, reader, we must go backward before we can go forward. We must consider for a moment what had occurred with the rat and the serving girl and the princess down in the dungeon before Despereaux made his way to them. What happened was this. Roscurl led the pea and Midge deep into the dungeon to a hidden chamber, and there he directed Midge to put the princess in chains. Gore, said Midge, she's going to have a hard time learning her lessons if she's all chained up like. Do as I say, said Roscurl. Maybe, said Midge. Before I lock her up, her and me could switch outfits, so we could start in already with her being me and me being a princess. Oh, yes, said Roscurl. Certainly. A wonderful idea. Miss Midgery. Oh, a wonderful idea, Miss Midgery. Princess, take off your crown and give it to the serving girl. The pea sighed and took off her crown and handed it to Midge. And Midge put it on, and it slid immediately right down her small head and came to a rest, quite painfully, on her poor, abused ears. It's a biggish thing, she said, and painful like. Well, well, said Roscurl. How do I look? Midge asked, smiling at him. Ridiculous, he said. Laughable. Midge stood, blinking back tears. You mean I don't look like a princess? She said to the rat. I mean, said Roscurl, you will never look like a princess, no matter how big a crown you put on your tiny head. You look exactly like the fool you are, and always will be. Now make yourself useful and chain the princess up. Dress up time is over. Midge sniffed and wiped at her eyes and then bent to look at the pile of chains and locks on the floor. And now, Princess, he said, I'm afraid that the time for your truth has arrived, and I will now tell you what your future holds. As you consign me to the darkness, so I consign you, too, to a life spent in the dungeon. Midge looked up. Ain't you going upstairs to be a serving maid? No, said Rescue. Ain't I going to be a princess then? No, said Rescue. But I want to be a princess. No one, said Rescue, cares what you want. As you know, reader, Midge Riso had heard this sentiment expressed many times in her short life, but now, in the dungeon, it hit her full force. The rat was right. No one cared what she wanted. No one had ever cared. And perhaps, worst of all, no one ever would care. I want, cried Midge. Shh, said the princess. Shut up, said the rat. I want, stopped Midge. I want. What do you want, Midge? The princess said softly. Eh? Shouted Midge. What do you want, Midge Riso? The princess shouted. Don't ask her that, said Ruscaro. Shut up, shut up. But it was too late. The words had been said. The question at last had been asked. The world stopped spinning, and all of creation held its breath, waiting to hear what it was that Midge Riso wanted. I want, said Midge. Yes, shouted the pea. I want my ma, cried Midge in the silent, waiting. I want my ma, cried Midge in the silent, waiting world. I want my ma. Oh, said the princess. She held out her hand to Midge. Midge took hold of it. I want my mother too, said the princess softly, and she squeezed Midge's hand. Stop it, shouted Rescue. Chain her up, chain her up. Gore, said Midge. I ain't going to do that. You can't make me. I got the knife, don't I? She took the knife and held it up. If you have any sense at all, said Rescue, and I heartedly doubt that you do, you will not use that instrument on me. Without me, you will never find your way out of the dungeon, and you will starve to death here or worse. Gore, said Midge. Then lead us out now, or I will chop you up into the little rat bits. No, said Rescue. The princess shall stay here in the darkness, and you, Midge, will stay with her. But I want to go upstairs, said Midge. I'm afraid that we are stuck here, Midge, shouted the princess, unless the rat has a change of heart and decides to lead us out. There will be no changes of heart, said Rescue. None. Gore, said Midge. She lowered the knife. And so the rat and the princess and the serving girl sat together in the dungeon, as outside the castle the sun rose and moved through the sky and sank to the earth again, and night fell. They sat together until the candle had burned out and another one had to be lit. They sat together in the dungeon. They sat and sat. And reader, truthfully, they might still be sitting there if a mouse had not arrived. Thank you for reading with me. I'll see you all soon.